muy importante ahorita. Entonces, quisiera presentar a nuestros ponentes. Les digo que Lorna Solís está con nosotros. Ella es la fundadora y directora ejecutiva de Elevate, que es una organización sin fines de lucro que está
Zero, a group that is providing education to young women uh, about climate change. Ishiro, it's a project that shows the success that many women have achieved even though facing climate change. We also have Dr. Gabriela Munoz Melendez. She will give us some context. She is from the Colegio de la Frontera Norte. Her PhD and master's in the environment. She will give you some information about what she is that she does. And we will have Vanessa Lopez again, the Executive Director for Salud por Derecho, or Right for Health Foundation. I would like to show that she's going to join us and that she does a very important job. And then you will get to know her the next time she's able to be with us. I will, as I would say, Doctor was going to give us some context so we can discuss a little more as how it is that we want to see this subject matter. Okay, let's see this slide. This has context. It gives us a little. We can go ahead and start our discussion now. Very well. So quickly, it's always surprised me. As a person that works with environment, I have a lot of formal education in that and a lot of practice, and I've done this for a long time. And and it's always pretty curious to see that it's emerging as far as the influence that it has in the very in all the variations we've seen regarding the weather. I find it to be curious because there's there's a long story about all the effects that climate change have had, and we talk about one of the theories, like such as what happened when there was the crossing through the Bering Strait of Bering. We also have the effects of during the Ice Age and what that caused. There's a very interesting book. When I was finishing my doctorate, I saw a very interesting presentation about that book. A book talking precisely about the fall of empires, how it is that many would go to a territory, exploit it up to the point where there would be competition for resources, wars, etc., and that's where all of this would affect the empire. So it's happened throughout history and all over the world. There is such a thing as a migration of populations due to environmental causes. I'm referring to erosion, droughts, many things. There's a relationship between the migration and these changes. When we refer to climate change, we refer to a variation in the climate. And this variation creates this greenhouse effect that has accelerated, that's been accelerated due to the Industrial Revolution. It's not, and then when they ask you, do you believe in climate change? It's not that I believe, it's like you can see it, and then the relationship it has to everything. And there's data and data that has been provided. It's present. So yeah, there is a lot to do as part of the climate change agenda. And I would recommend that you study and see into the limits that are seen. Th- There's, there's certain parts that are trying to explain ideas, representations as how to express these movements that that are seen now. The truth is that there's many ways to describe this. Next slide, please. So, please, with the next slide, please. Studies that have been done so far have used statistics, quantitative statistics, descriptive. That's kind of data that has been used through more specific uh, uh, surveys and a lot of other research studies, especially like, somebody will go, will participate in a workshop and ask other people and try to compile information. And this is really interesting. Even the migrants that we have interviewed here along the border, if one asks, why have you moved? Many of whom have said because of lack of money, but a lot have the misconception or the conception that it's all due to economics. But when you start talking to them more deeply, you you can find out that it's because they love the crops during 5 years, and so there these are climatic consequences. So at this early stage, I would like to do a summary. Yes, there's been studies done. There have been a lot of studies in many ways, both methodology and conceptual. And that is to try to project this. So what we have right now was that we see that some studies are more complete than others, some are really interesting, and they just cannot be compared or cannot be put together because they all provide different data, different points of view, different methodologies. And there are some things that are lacking too. For example, how do the adaptation processes affect, well, like migration? It's like it's gonna increase the living standard of people, also economic development. I sadly see that only we start talk. We're not looking for, and then there's also technological changes. It's like, what is it that we're doing for the communities? It's necessary to normalize things, to start to see what have been the contributions of all these studies, whether there have been small contributions or large.
Something additional that it is very common to find in the studies. I understand if we have to understand something that it is complex, the scientific methods tell us to divide it in stages, but it is very common not to put them together at the end. And so it is considered that the environmental factors are considered like pures, that they're in, there is no relation among themselves, but they do interrelate among themselves in this complexity, and there are ways to consider them. It's very common, for instance, that say, oh, yes, we need to, there is climate change and it has been flooded, but it is not the same in a rural and an urban area, or in a rural area where there is extraction, or an area where there are big projects, infrastructure projects. So they have been spoken about those effects, but very little about the complex interrelationship among them. So generally, it is separated the climatic factors or those that are associated with climate change. I already mentioned the examples: drought, floods, fires, and other environmental uh, impacts like the lack of water. Sometimes we disregard the economic activities that are causing this, and the models are done separately. And no, what we have found in our studies is those are interrelated, and sometimes they they push one to another. And there is something that usually doesn't consider interesting the immigrant. What my political scientists will say that there is no control over their actions or responsibilities. I'm not talking about blaming the immigrants, but I'm thinking about how they can start the individual adaptation process. And this is where we end. So we have been studying about the context, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And I don't know how to see you again.
So stop sharing.
My apologies. I'm not very good at with this.
I mean, everything is closed. So it's just like, no da para cerrar.
Let me try to take over your slide control for you. Give me 1 second.
Estos son las diapositivas en inglés. Lo que yo veo.
Sí, Cari, si puedes dejar de compartir también, gracias.
Quería tener una transición un poco más suave.
I wanted to have a smoother transition, Doctora, because you were talking about that we need to seek different models. And you were also talking that there is the need to talk about the environmental conflicts and also the impacts of large infrastructure projects or large projects, and also to say that the migrants have agency and they can resist the processes. And Lorna, if I can ask you to join us, I think that quite a bit of your work has been consistent in looking at the impact and how can they be really pay address face. And then Chiros looks at the women who have taken agencies to respond to these challenges. So if you can share a little bit how you arrived to this work, because you came from an entirely different world, isn't that right? Yes, yes. And thank you so much for the invitation, Dr. Gabriela. I love what you said. It really, it's very painful because, of course, it's a global problem that it is worsening. Thank you for your work. Delania, thank you so much for the invite. Yes, I started my my background is finances. I was in Wall Street 16 years. I was working for a financial magazine in Manhattan, New York. I was working in Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America with infrastructure projects. So this is something completely different from what I'm doing now. And honestly, it was September 11th that made me realize that I needed to do something else in my world, in my life, to give more to the planet and the world that we live in. So we left from a beautiful career, 16 years. I was very happy to do something that was very challenging, very difficult. I miss many things like the expense account. Uh, the bar is low. But decided to give a scholarship to girls that are displaced or refugees because of war or climate. And climate has been growing because it started initially with the war. And I'm originally from Nicaragua. I cannot, you know that. So I will stop. I will stop talking about Nicaragua. I had to leave my country when I was little, and I very recently came back because of personal issues with my parents. But I grew up and I was in the U.S. until December last year. So my work, giving grants to these girls and also working with Fortune 500 companies like Accenture, Microsoft, big companies that employ them. Imagine these women, these girls come from Venezuela, Somalia, Gaza, Afghanistan, helping them to get them out of there. It's a very difficult work. So that work has lasted for 13 years, and in the last 4 years, I saw this increase of girls that were applying for the scholarship that were stating why they were leaving their countries. And it was not necessarily the conflict, it was climate. Like it doesn't stop raining, the soil is muddy, nothing grows, we had to leave. But it could be several things like the gangs and climate. Sometimes the fight starts with water and it ends up being a different conflict. So everything is an ecosystem that plays both aspects. It's not just one or the other, that you start with one and then end in the other, or are both at the same time. So what we have seen is an increase of these people who are asking help. And I say, well, I cannot do anything about government. I wish, but I can't. But something could be done regarding to the people who are being displaced because of the climate. There will be a way to help them to mitigate the problems that they are facing so they can stay in their countries. I know because I left my country. It was because of a war. My parents didn't want to leave. Usually, you don't want to go, even if you have a very small piece of land with 3 chickens and your cow, and you're in your community with your community, your family, your religion. You don't want to live. There is misconception, lack of education, incredible, big confusion that everybody wants to live to the US and Europe. It's not true. I can tell you from my own experience. So I thought there is a way to help them to stay, and the answer is yes. And obviously, I was not a part of that work, so I had to talk to many people who are experts in the field because I'm not an expert in the field. So I did talk to people who are in the academia and companies in different roles. And the answer is yes, there are ways to mitigate some of the problems they are facing. So I decided, okay, let's focus on that. And that's how Shiro got started. And the theme of Shiro is let's go around the world looking for women and enterprising women that are having really struggling with the climate. And the point is to create with them the answer to how to solve the problem. Sometimes there is no solution. If there are floods, very difficult to mitigate. When you found out, please let me know because we don't have an answer. But if it's drought is interesting. We have found, and Doctora Gabriela is going to tell me, she will know, this drought people stay much longer because just a little bit of rain, with a little bit of rain, something grows. So there is a hope that it's going to change, it's going to rain. So without the information of what's happening in their region, in their plot of land, now in a year and 2 years, it's very difficult to make decisions. How can you take a decision? It's every day it's like it hasn't rained, it hasn't rained. Without that information, it's very difficult for them to make decisions in their lives. So that the community moved all together because the river is going to dry out in 2 years. We have that information. So that information is not there. So what we're doing with Shiro, we're traveling the world. And I'm going to give you an example. I just came back from Malawi. We visited this women in Michinchi in central Malawi, I'm talking about Malawi, but it could be central Honduras. But the same I find this in every place. The problem there is drought. It has been brutal. The last years it has been much harder than in prior years. Many people have already had to leave the area because nothing will grow. So they were willing to try anything to see what could work. They were desperate. So there were two changes. One was to change the seeds to an anti-drought seed, and the other thing is that they are growing peanuts. And the way how they were doing it, it was down in one row. That's the way how they have done for many generations, just one row. So the idea was to do two rows, and the two rows are close from one another. And what that do is that makes a canopy. But when there is little water, it creates moisture, and that moisture helps to trap it. So you need less water. That's the point, because there is drought. With just those two small interventions, guess they almost double their peanut production. Just two things, and that was incredible. For them, that was something amazing. What else did we do? We asked them, what else can you do? And they say, we need this equipment to produce peanut butter and peanut oil, and we're helping them. So the topic here is how can we help this community to face the problems that they are facing, or create this solution with them and think what else can we bring so they are in seriously better. If you are increasing your resources, you're going to be able to send your kids to school, bring better doctors to your communities. And that's the list of the women, because they are the ones that they wrote. What do we do for the kids, the health, everything? And that's the topic. it is to analyze to see what can we do and do it with them. They were involved in it from the beginning, which seed and why. Nobody came to tell them what to do. It was dialogue, understanding what's the problem, the situation, the goal, one, two, three, for them, and work with them. These people usually don't have they are off the grid. They don't have electricity. Sometimes they don't have way to they don't have phones, smartphones with apps. So the information that they have is really basic. And something that we found is that not nobody is going there. Nobody has visited. But you know who come there? The buyers, the peanut buyers. And they are the ones that say, why are the production is so low? They don't help. They come just to buy, but they don't support with the problems that they are facing. So that's where other conversations.
That's- So obviously in Latin America, we have a lot of projects in Mexico, Honduras. I had here in Nicaragua. I can't implement that one right now, but I hope to be able to do it at some point. But that is the the theme, is like in Mexico, it's in Yucatan. The women have been able to open the water by hand the way their ancestors did it before. But when they did that, the life came back to these ecological areas, for the snails, the snails and the fish. So they did that by themselves. Uh, this is in Chile. Some young people came to help, but it wasn't kind of improving, so they decided to do it the way their ancestors had done it, and it worked. And so Shiro is basically celebrating these women that have already been able to resolve this to show the rest of the world. And so basically showing the world that they don't need any innovation, it can still be done, and celebrate them. And that way other people in other places that had that same issue can realize that there's a more financially feasible way to do this. It is something that was passed on by their ancestors. And so obviously there's also innovation, counting seeds, see how they grow. Where important thing is trying to find where they're at and what they need to do. And yeah, in that particular project, they were not meeting anybody else, and we're just celebrating their achievements. And now they are going around Mexico to help other women, and that is beautiful. And helping them do the same thing, because now, they basically are the experts. So they're not the examples for others. So I will stop right there.
Gracias, Lorna, porque
Thank you, Lorna.
cuando la doctora estaba hablando
Like the doctor was talking about that
la migración
migration.
no lo piensan, bueno, en los Estados Unidos,
When at least in the
todo el
U.S.,
mundo, pero
I don't know if it happens in other parts of the world. I think so, but that the migration is
no
something
saben ni por qué,
they don't even know why.
he sido así, que la migración es algo
And they say that's never been like this, that it's something new and we have to face it. And what I'm seeing is that there's a need that they know. I mean, humans have always have us migrated. There's been good and bad migrations. We have seen through generations. And it's a very complex subject matter, but as you were saying, doctor, they're not seeing how complex it really is. They're just seeing like either like if it's the climate, or if it's due to conflict, or it's because of a project. And in all their work and dialogue and everything, you've been able to see that there is a way to see it and explain it better. Well, without any doubt, they're trying to understand the phenomenon better. Remember, I'm an academic, remember. And it's impressive the work we've done, and I'm very appreciative of everybody. There's people that have worked all over the world, and it's always a matter of being optimistic to continue this work. But returning to your question, well, we try to understand better how complex it is, but in the moment that we start not only trying to having dialogue, but trying to convince ourselves that they're criminalizing some mobility and what our responsibility is in that movement. It's kind of hard to, especially trying to explain to a society that is not reflecting about everything. I'm not I don't do social media anymore because during the pandemic, after the social media, I seen so much of it, I was getting sick. And we have been there. We have seen the communities. Some people, these people. How can you say that? So this freedom uh, that social media has given us has also given us some way to say things that are horrendous. And so one of I don't know if I've already answered what you asked, but I would like to touch on something that Lorna made. It's not that everybody wants to run to go over there. No. What we saw in our studies while after interviewing migrants from Central America that were on their way to the U.S. and were detained at the border, we interviewed several of them, and we were able to see that people were not they were not leaving after the first drought or the first flood. We found that in average things would change. They would do something else in the meantime. They tried things to change what they were doing in order to be able to stay. It was like probably 5 to 7 different things that they have tried to where the point that they were having, and then, came point that, they had to, but then they want to. And then there's some that can't, they just can't. And there's some that are immobile due to financial circumstances. So it's not, it doesn't mean that just because there's something happens and they all like run away and leave. Like in Europe, same thing. I I I lived in England for many years. It's something you see everywhere, but what we're studying here is that they don't want to go. They don't want to go. And sometimes they're just basically expelled. Yes, and another thing Lorna mentioned is that maybe, yes, maybe it was a chain of events. Maybe there was no water, then somebody would come and take over that well, and then the conflict would start, and then people started being hungry, then there's conflict. And so then something that I would like to take up again is how can we increase resilience? That's what of us academics call it. Is we know each other. How can we help that people to be able to better understand or withstand this situation? Is there's many things that need to be changed. I mean, like how this, like what they're doing in the Yucatan Peninsula, how they're like capturing vapor water. Oh, steam. One of the things that we have seen here in the rural communities here, where it's very much of a desert, and I have seen other international institutions, not like Norma, but implement the common government. I'm sorry. That was very academic of a comment, but pardon me. Well, once basically, okay, I'm gonna help you, and I'm gonna be help you put a pump when there's no electric connection. I will gonna put a greenhouse, and I'll tell you where I'm gonna put it, and that. No, you have to talk to the person who's having to face these issues and ask them and help them the way they need the help, so that they, based on what they know, many times, like we say, there's ancestral knowledge. And I think we need to be listening better because, yes, because if what we're seeing, I think there could be an answer. I see it, but we need to listen, respect all the different climates, all the different places, and try to remember bioagriculture. A lot of them are basically indigenous communities, but that's true. Much of what we see as far as the effects of the migration due to climate change and the social conflict, we see that the most vulnerable groups are like women. And it's not just because it's popping up now, it's historically been a vulnerable group. But oh, well, pardon me, I kind of divert a little bit. So, yes, because it makes me think I have worked for migrant clinicians for 3 decades, trying to find a way to help them get people to get to where they want to be, to get the services that they need, and that they can do what they want to do or know how to do, but always with the idea, I think, with the idea that we're seeing we're only focusing on their vulnerabilities because they don't have money, they don't speak English, because they don't have transportation. Instead of and really thinking that, well, I'm focusing on their vulnerabilities, they're focusing on opportunities. And basically, that's like a clash of minds because they're seeing forward and ahead, and I'm over here just worried, and just hoping that I don't throw him into greater risk. Like I met this woman at the border that he'd been come 3 times from Venezuela, and he had kidney issues. He finally made it to the border after knowing what had happened. She came with her son. He got him out of the hospital and crossed the border and asked for asylum because she already knew that in Mexico it was going to be hard. It was going to be harder and easier to come into the U.S. And she basically carried him to the border, and they got to the shelter, and he was receiving dialysis, and he was in a transplant. It's like, why don't you stay? No, our goal is to get to Nueva York. And that's where we want to be. And I was worried. I kept telling them, no, you're not going to be able to work in New York. You should just stay, especially if you requested asylum. And she just looked at me and said, yes, I'm going to work and I'm going to get my family ahead. And it was quite a learning experience for me, knowing that I was not focused in the right way. Was just focusing on all the vulnerabilities to this. However, she was looking forward, was searching for those opportunities, and I see that we see a lot when people they they figure out how to make it happen. And I just don't know how we're going to be able to change this because the we need to also consider the people. I don't know if you have ideas of how people that we say we want to help, how we should develop the way of thinking. I don't know. I need at this moment some advice. If you have some ideas on how all of us working in this, supporting people, seeing, helping them, seeing migration, trying to help migrate without knowing im- how, how and with what are we going to help them? Do you have any ideas?
Sí, sí, yo estaba pensando que,
Well, I was thinking,
y obviamente yo me enfoco en
well, basically, I
gente que tiene
focus on
becas o
people
hay
that
gente que,
have
bueno,
like
está creciendo con
that
entonces, hay un,
they're
hay
growing
una,
their
ay,
food.
Dios mío, un gap,
The-
hay
So
un espacio
there's
bien
a
grande
gap, a big
entre
gap
los que están,
between those
una brecha bien
of
grande entre
the farmers.
los
So
que
there's a
están
big gap
recibiendo
between
nuestra
those that
ayuda, el que
are
están
growing our
trabajando en
food,
forma
the ones that's
y
growing the
los
tomatoes,
consumidores que vamos
and the
al supermercado a
consumers
comprar ese
that
tomate. O
go to
vamos
the
a,
store
o
to
mejor ejemplo,
purchase that
vas
tomato.
al supermercado a
Or for
comprar
instance, you go to the store and you buy
Anuka honey, tu miel que
your
fascina
your
de
honey,
Nueva Zelanda, ¿ok?
your New
Y
Zealand
tú
honey,
dices,
and then
¿cómo
suddenly
es
you
que
say,
ya no tienen
why is it that they don't
el mes
have
pasado? Y hasta
the,
ese
the,
momento
the honey anymore?
te diste cuenta
And
que algo
it
está
was not
pasando
till
con los
then
bees, no te
that
metiste a ver
something is
qué está
happening
bien.
with the
La
bees.
barbaridad
Then you
real
go
es
online and you
que
go, oh my God, what happened?
porque así somos muy spoiled.
We're very
Muy,
spoiled. And so,
muy
it's
tenemos todo y somos y no nos empieza a dar
and
Se congeló.
se congeló. And the image froze the audio.